And we're live on Advanced Philosophy Memes. I'm here with our friend Devan. Is that right?
Yeah, Devin, you can also call me Voice of Reason or Voice. It's I'm using my moniker right there for my YouTube channel. So
Check out Voice of Reason, guys. He's good. He's got some pretty interesting stuff to talk about. I think we're gonna talk about philosophy and existentialism, and maybe a little bit about Star Wars even. So that'd be kind of cool. But let's also like remember. I was trying to remember what we originally. What's funny is we were like having an argument or something, a dispute on Facebook. Yeah. I don't even remember what it was. It was like, hey, that guy's cool. He's like willing to have an opinion about what he's saying. That's epic. Let's talk to him and like have him expand on what he was saying. I don't even remember what it was about at this point.
I actually do. It was mainly about you posting some stuff with regards to the idea of canceling Thanksgiving, and I sort of wanted to go ahead and explain where it is that was coming from on that. I assume you're familiar at the very least with the war on Thanksgiving, the whole thing that the conservative media tends to go on about every. I mean, the war on Christmas.
The culture war. They have this idea everything's a culture war every direction. Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah. So basically, the war on Christmas is essentially for the audiences who don't really know what's going on, in case if they're like not from America. It's this thing in America that constantly comes up, usually by Fox News and conservative radio talk show hosts, in which what effectively happens is that they constantly moan and whine about things, about corporations doing things to make people feel like not being rejected or not being like trying to like put out faith-based neutral statements like happy holidays or stuff like that, and instead of like doing that and whatnot and just accepting it, they go, it's a war on Christmas. They're trying to take our like Christmas greetings away and whatnot. I think the last one that happened before this morphed into the war on Thanksgiving was that it was that they were whining about the fact that Starbucks decided to go ahead and use, instead of their red, white, and blue coffee stuff and whatnot, it was literally just they painted it red and then do the red, white, and green. And they were saying, that's a war on Christmas or whatever. So basically, you posted something about how it is that government officials are trying to cancel or in some fashion trying to.
In certain, I was, and this is like, it's a very extreme circumstance, but I was saying Gavin Newsom in California has rigidly, and I'm making the joke quoted because I remember what I said. I called him a nuisance, and that might be rude. But I was saying Gavin Newsom had made. How many of you remember that they made Thanksgiving illegal? And so it was very much like that kind of a thing, because it's not illegal in the sense that you can legally do things. But what I was saying was that they're limiting the individual's sovereignty in circumstances rather than limiting the government's sovereignty, right? So the government has authority only because supposedly the government only has authority because we've signed social contracts which give up our right to not submit. We have a right, Thomas Hobbes said, to not submit. And you could say, if you were going to be beaten down, you might be forced to submit or die if you can't. But that was the original right, and the right. And then you could say, all right, I will submit, for an exchange of privileges, or, if you promise due process of law based on things that we've decided, the Magna Carta, etc. This idea that there's a limitation of government, but that's positive and negative governance, right? So the idea there, the Soviets said positive governance is when a government does things for you, and negative governance is what a government cannot do. So you could say the government cannot interfere with the constitutional rights of an individual's peaceable assembly. And so I was saying, well, the government is interfering with our autonomy and sovereignty. It's not that it's technically illegal, but it's like, it's limitations. And so that's a slippery slope. That was my thought.
Well, the way in which I tackle this is, and I do concede that those are very important points to consider, but we also have to consider the context in which the government is acting. Right now, concurrently, there's a bit of a pandemic going on at the moment, and we have to look at the history of what it is that the government is allowed to be able to respond with regards to things like a pandemic. And this was ruled on over a century ago even. And there's an entire article on it by I think it's the Bar Review Association, one which they literally line up all the various different powers that governments, state governments specifically, are allowed to do during a time of pandemic. And one of these powers that they're given is, of course, to limit the ability to be able to engage in social gatherings, or the amount of people that are in social gatherings, in case if they are are like worried about a spread of a pandemic, or a pandemic becoming an endemic, which is basically the idea is that the pandemic has become so widespread that it's now going to be with us endemically, almost in an almost indefinite basis, one which we might have, one which even if we have a vaccine here in America, it will probably end up becoming seasonal. So
let me ask, are you familiar with Heshi Tischler, my buddy who from New York, who was arrested recently? He's running for city council. Have you seen any videos on that yet?
No, I'm not familiar with that. No.
Let me pull up a picture really quickly to show you what I'm talking about here. So this is my buddy Heshi, and he's running for city council in Brooklyn, and he's an Hasidic Jew. And he's a mensch. He's a real good guy. I really like this guy a lot. But what he did, is he said, like, we're not in Nazi Germany, but it's a slippery slope. And so he went to the parks in New York where Cuomo has been closing the parks down, and he won't let the children play. They want children to go to school. And they're saying, look, we've been through this. They put up with it for a minute, but once it got to the point that they weren't letting them go to their temples and they weren't letting them have synagogue and shul while people were going to Walmart, and they were like, look, this is ridiculous. You have strip clubs open. Why can't we have the parks for the children open? These are open spaces. So he went in, he got arrested for this, but he cut open the parks. And so this is a big movement happening in New York City. And it's a touchy subject because, again, they're Jewish. So they've been through this, and they're pretty concerned that we're going back that direction, and not just for Jews, for everybody clearly right now. But they're in a situation where he's like pretty much able to talk about this and no one else is, because they're considering that, they think eventually that this will be worse. And a lot of people are like, well, we want to control you. We want to suppress the COVID, pandemic. But at the same time, is it legal to limit people's peaceable assembly? Is there constitutional precedent to say that they have the right to keep worshiping and going to synagogue? And I kind of relate that to the Thanksgiving article. I don't know. What do you think about that?
I'm not entirely too sure in that regard, because it gets a little bit tricky with trying to engage in the whole process of how it is that the government engages in legal strictures in regards to public gatherings, or even because churches are technically public, and public gatherings for purposes of prayer and whatnot. So I suppose it depends on what the issue is. But with regards to what's happening in New York, there definitely is some sort of double standard, legal standard even. And I know for a fact that New York has always had a bit of an anti-Semitic route when it comes to the Jewish population. And to some degree, this has even been driven over by Irish Catholics who are within the area as well. So that's somewhat of an issue there too. So, it wouldn't surprise me if there are people in certain areas of the states, or in certain states specifically, that are utilizing double standards, or are acting upon various different forms of bigotry in that sense with regards to certain populations. So
that's actually a fascinating point, that it might be separated. So if you think that maybe parts of the community are getting double standard and treated worse than others, how does that relate? Do you think, in other words, do you think COVID or the pandemic is being used to exploit the oppression of certain peoples?
Yeah, I do think that that's the case, really. But I think it should be looked at on a state-by-state issue. With California and whatnot, specifically with our own governor as it is. By the way, I'm in California, for those of the viewers who want to know that. The only real problem that we've had with regards to certain issues with how the government has responded to pandemics are mainly police oriented, in the sense in which they will break up I forget what this was, but I believe there was a similar issue in California, in which police were arresting people for violating some kind of COVID stricture and whatnot, when in fact they were just simply giving church concessions via a car that was just a drive-by church confession thing. You just simply drive by, you speak into the speaker like you're in a like you're ordering food from McDonald's and whatnot. They arrested the pastor and everyone who was involved, everyone who was doing that, even though they were clearly trying to follow orders. And I don't think that was an issue of bigotry. I think that was just police trying to give out the tickets so that way they could have their funds and whatnot, and with people and with things
That's the big part.
Yeah, with things like Gavin Newsom, for example, he set up a bunch of laws and strictures in regards to gatherings, and then he went to a gathering which violated all those laws and strictures, and everyone else, as a result of that, says, "Hey, Newsom, I don't care about your apology. You need to go to jail because that's what's required of the law." So.
Right. And that's funny because Gavin Newsom spent Thanksgiving with 20, 30 people.
Yeah, something like that.
Restaurant or something. So there's definitely a double standard going on. I'm part of it. I talk about how people should be safe, and I've been to other countries, since COVID. I went to Bermuda. It was in New York. I mean, my passport is offensive to almost anyone who cares about the pandemic. But at the same time, I was wearing a mask before anyone else was on the flights. And this last flight, they said, you don't have to wear it as long as you're eating. And they gave me a bag of Cheetos. I think it was Cheez-Its. There were about 20 Cheez-Its there. And I think I spent about 2 hours eating the Cheez-Its, so more and more people are getting frustrated with the pandemic limitations that are going on them and the hypocrisy of the elite. And California seems like a big place for that. The reason I brought up Thanksgiving, which I thought was interesting because we're growing up right now. By the way, you have an accent. Are you from California originally?
Yeah, I've actually lived in California my entire life. A lot of people comment here on how I have an accent or whatever.
You sound kind of East Coast. I like it. Cool.
Yeah, a lot of people have that misconception, primarily because I grew up with as a young kid with a speech impediment in some sense, but after around 12 or 13 or 14, I worked that out, and for some reason it's developed into an East Coast accent. I don't know how the hell that happened. So
it works well. I like it. Well, I had actually as a kid a linguist teacher who helped me learn, and she was from New York as well. So maybe it's just the linguist teachers that help you through that processing. But okay, so Thanksgiving. The reason I brought up Thanksgiving, and this is right now we have the 1776 versus 1619 argument. So 1619 is this historical idea, and by the way, I'm surrounded with it was Ben from the Federalist who gave me this stout. Most of the people around me are very red, but I'm like a neoconservative Marxist. I'm like Kissinger level. So I think I'm heterodox as you get. I'm not a centrist. I'm the opposite. I tie together the extremes. So I agree with 1619 in a lot of ways, and a lot of people around me are astounded by me for that. But it's true. America wasn't founded in 1776. It was really by 1619 being used to exploit people, and there was colonialism and a lot of things. But one of my favorite stories is the Thanksgiving one, because you have this John. The Puritans were told they could not centrally gather in their homes. They couldn't have private worship. The church at that point was no longer the church. It was a new state church because the king had wanted to have 5 wives, and he was killing his wives and things. And so the Anglicans, existed, but they wanted you to go to the Anglican church, and they weren't into it. They wanted to do their own thing. They're like, this is crazy. A church run by this king, and he's saying that he's going to pay. We have to pay him to go to heaven. Well, they charged these guys for having community gatherings, 8,000 pounds sterling, which is, gosh, I don't even know how to describe that in that's that'd be a tonnage from a ship.
The equivalent of $50,000 in today's pricing, maybe even more.
Yeah, it's probably, and the thing is, you have to imagine $50,000 in a place where peasants don't make, $50,000 a year even. So it's really it's indentured. And then what you do with somebody who can't pay that, you arrest them and you force them to work for nothing. So the rest of their life, they're paying off this debt that's that they're stuck with. And so that was a way to enslave and entrap all of these people into indentured servitude and debt by saying that they shouldn't be worshiping on their own. So they had to escape. And they left in the night on boats to Leiden, which is Leiden in Netherlands. But Netherlands was full of freedom, too much freedom, right? It had sugarcane, cocaine, tobacco, people with tall witch hats. You had Spinoza, the first atheist that was public. The Jews abandoned him, but Netherlanders let him stay. And so you saying he didn't believe in an eternal soul. Amsterdam, like Holland was weird, right? So they were afraid of their kids being, arrested in England, but they were even more afraid of their kids hanging out with Dutch kids or whomever was like, because like it was the melting pot of the world. So they went off to America so that they could go. They joined a corporation that was doing trade, and they set off. And the first Thanksgiving was a year of humiliation, they called it, because there was no. They were starving, and they were, the next year was the Thanksgiving where they were interacting with the Aboriginal and Indigenous Indians, as they called them, and they were exchanging food. So Thanksgiving is not, we're not taught that version of the story. We're taught that like the Indians welcome them in Pocahontas in this Disney movie, and it's this crazy thing, but it's not. It's really that they were trying to escape limitation of sovereignty. So that's why I think it's, and so the reason I bring that up is, where do we go with sovereignty and individual sovereignty? I mean, if you're thinking that a virus is at war with humanity, like where's the confluence of individual sovereignty versus social agenda to protect a species or a race or an environment?
I would say that the way in which we get there, or the way in which we achieve that, is basically by meeting people's basic needs in terms of like things like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, trying to create systems and create sort of means of, I guess you would say, how do I phrase this? Trying to make it so that way people have more access to the things that they need, as well as being able to have more ownership over what they build. I myself, I'm a technocratic zeitgeist type person. So I tend to believe that the best way in which we create a sort of government, if you would, is not by the traditional type, but basically by trying to make it so that way the needs are locally met, if they can possibly be met in terms of resource allocation. But we do that through the intelligent use, intelligent management of the production, distribution of these resources through technological means such as AI, various different. Hey there, Intriguey. Anyways, through the intelligent use of AI, through the intelligent use of mechanization, and it's really as a means of, and because humans are so used to having to work, really, the idea of utilizing technology and these management systems to free people from the need to work for subsistence, really, is kind of viewed as sort of a communist idea, when the reality is that it's really simply the emancipation of work. You're literally just simply trying to, you're literally just simply trying to free people from the need to work for an income, and just allowing people to work for what they're passionate about, work for what they're good at, or to try to work to create a name for themselves in this regard. But it's not necessarily for money, because all your needs are met, and the only thing you might necessarily need is validation in your work or things like that. And I think freeing people up to be able to have that, to be able to seek validation for their work, would be a good step in the right direction.
That's beautiful. Actually, we just did an episode a month ago or so about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and I called it the dessert breakfast pyramid, because if you think about the idea of American breakfast, it started out as King Louis's midnight snack, because in the middle of the night, after the king had everything, he was like, look, bring me something hot and cold or I'll kill you, and bitter and sweet at the same time, or I'll kill you. And so some guy was like, all right, here's ice cream with hot fudge, and he's like, all right, you get to live another night. And then about 3 or 4 a.m. he goes to bed. Now that's Americanism of Bernays public relations is like, the breakfast is the most important meal. Why is it the most important meal? I mean, it isn't like biologically the most important. It's actually unhealthy to have, and the food that we choose is certainly not the healthy food. It's a dessert. But it's because psychologically it opens you up at the top of the hierarchy of needs, and you say, okay, well, what really does matter? Is it that you want a pool? Well, what if everyone has access to everything, and you have a projector instead of a TV, so you can pick the size of the screen you want? The world is in a VR helmet. It's whatever you want it to be. When we start to get rid of all of the scarcity, where are we left, and what's the value of our society at that point? It's all about bringing change to society, making the world a better place. The things that they taught us in the 90s as 6-year-olds, like, you could be anything. Make sure you change the world, like that kind of a goal. But then the problem is that we're in a society that is constantly trying to limit growth because they're scared of success. I mean, every movie about every James Bond villain, the villain is a rich guy. He's a guy who's able to accomplish his goals in a world of scarcity. And so it seems like the villain archetypically is the sovereignty.
Yeah. When it comes down to it, the way in which media portrays this in a lot of ways, and I kind of want to get into that to do a little bit of segue, if you'd like. The way in which media portrays this stuff is somewhat one-dimensional, but there is an element of truth to it. The reason why it is that so many people who are by and large villains, who are also very much rich and very affluent and whatnot, is basically to suggest a fundamental truth about the system that we live in, that when it comes to great obscene amount of wealth, great obscene amount of money, there is, technically speaking, an element of inherent corruption in that. Not necessarily in the sense that you had to have started out that way by being corrupt or whatever. It's the idea, of course, that you start out getting wealth through trying to meet a simple need in society, and through over time, the more and more you try to obtain more and more of that wealth, you're eventually consumed through the process of getting more and more wealth. And you then lose sight of that, and eventually obscene wealth comes in, and it becomes something that you yearn for, something that you desire in that sense. And eventually it just becomes more's not enough, you got to have it all. And in a sense, it's basically pointing out to the simple fact that the system that we are in kind of encourages that behavior. It encourages those values in a lot of ways. And it's no wonder why it is that the richest people at the very top try to delude themselves, or even delude the public in some sense. Like, for example, with the CEO, with the former CEO of Microsoft being Bill Gates and whatnot, he vehemently deludes the public to saying that he's doing great things, he's doing wonderful things, when in fact all he is trying to do is simply cement his legacy in the eyes as a great philanthropist, while trying to erase or even create sort of a cult of personality, which will go after people who will bring up all the fucking shady shit that he did to get that obscene amount of wealth and whatnot, you know. And then there are, of course, people like what's his name? What's the Jewish guy name that people? I had it in there. I forgot it. What's the name of that Jewish guy that people always bring up with regards to how it's like funding Black Lives Matter or whatever? George Soros. Yeah, George Soros. Yeah. For example, people like George Soros, I have no problem believing that the guy actually intends good stuff, because if you look at his politics under the Bush administration, his entire goal there was to make the Bush administration's policies and his foreign policy to not only not be popular, but to also have him be a one-term president through his media influence. And the reason why that was because he saw the neocons and the people that Bush was appointing as being no different than the goofball and SS that were helped to put him in the camps. He's a Holocaust survivor, and as a result, he has a deep, abiding hatred of those types of mindsets. So I can believe that in that sense. And, you know, his support of Obama was fairly tepid in the sense that, well, he supported the rhetoric, and he supported his rhetoric in terms of media. But, you know, under Obama, he still didn't like his foreign policy decisions because it was very much a continuation of the Bush policies. So he still pretty much funneled money against Obama when it came to his policy decisions, but helped Obama when it came to the media rhetoric that he was going into. And while that is laudable, and I can certainly respect the guy in that sense. Sorry, my cat's trying to get on top of my lap here. While that's laudable to some extent, it is something that we should all be against, because he is utilizing his rich influence to influence country to influence the politics of people of countries that he's not citizens of, or I think he has dual citizenship in the U.S. But that's kind of irrelevant because he hardly ever visits the U.S. in the first place. He doesn't really have much cultural. He doesn't really have much cultural solidarity with us in the U.S. in this regard. Oh, what's this?
Oh, this is sorry. I was just looking at this earlier tonight. Colbert had an interview with Barack Obama Agenda 21, and he said in the interview that his drone strikes, which killed hundreds of civilians, it's actually much more than that. If you know that he dropped a bomb every 8 minutes for the entire 8 years he was president, it's actually quite fascinating about the baseball cards, like Pokemon cards that they use to decide who was worth killing 5 or 6 or 13 people around the person, that kind of Osama bin Laden thing where people died as casualties. He said, even though the loss of one civilian casualty is tragic, the problem with the drone program was not that it caused an inordinate amount of civilians casualties, but that the drone probably had less collateral damage. So in other words, he doesn't even care that it killed so many innocent people, but he cares that it didn't always effectively kill the dude that they wanted to die, which is so funny. Or sad. It's not funny because it's true, but it's really telling, I think.
Yeah, it is really telling. But to go back to the whole thing in that regard, he's not only doing this as a means of trying to influence people's politics, even if it's for the better. He's doing it specifically to override some of the political discussions and political issues, and he's even utilizing his money as a megaphone to drown out local state issues and make it about to be against these national foreign policy things, which I support being against, but I don't like the fact that he's drowning out other local voices for local state issues and making the whole thing primarily about the foreign policies that he doesn't like, which I don't like either. And not to mention, I would be a hypocrite to be against him because he does the same thing that Rupert Murdoch does with Fox News. And while the politics are more agreeable in a sense, I just don't want to be a hypocrite by supporting something that one person does and I hate, and another person does and I would like because it's part of my politics. I don't want to be in that sort of.
I totally feel you. When I worked for CNN, my boss was the creator of Bert de Brouw. He was the creator of the Jerry Springer Show, and so he would constantly get this black psychic lady and have her on the show with some serious politician or pilot or engineer just because it annoyed people. He's like, oh, but it's good because you're getting reactions. I'm like, yeah, but it's downvotes. It's like, no. It's just reactions. And he was totally right. The way Google looks at it is that you had a reaction. If you can downvote 400 million times, that's going to push a video up to the top more than 100 upvotes or something. So it's all about reactions.
Yeah, that's really sad in a lot of ways because it shouldn't just be about reactions. It should be about the type of dialogue you engender. Reaction is a reaction, but then there's a dialogue that's happening there that you should pay attention to in regards to that reaction. Like, for example, what Gillette did in regards to their whole ad and whatnot. While the message was sincere, the way in which they portrayed it was very, well, let's just say off-putting, because let's be realistic here. How many of us have grown up and have had fights like the one that the dad in there breaks up or whatever? How many people would even say that is allowed to happen under them and whatnot? Like most people, when fights get to that point, when which the kids are seriously screaming at each other and trying to even throw punches at each other, father usually breaks that stuff up. It may have been different in the 60s, in the 50s or whatever, where parents let kids fight. But let's be perfectly honest, most of us at the very least were raised with boomers who by and large didn't let things get to that level, primarily because they remember it getting to that level with they were in the gatherings with their parents and they didn't like it, so they decided not to do that with us. And I don't know why it is that Gillette decided to go ahead and insert a trope from the 50s or the 60s or something like that. I don't know. It was just bad optics for the most part. There were a couple of things that were pretty good in terms of memes, like the guy who the guy who's going after the girl and the other guy who just simply opens up the door and says, "No, bro, no, don't do that." That's pretty good meme material, all things considered. And that is an element of truth to it there. But if they would just like drop the 50s and the 60s references of social behavior, which may or may not exist, depending on where you are at geographically speaking. But if they were to drop that and mostly focus it on behaviors that we as, well, millennials and whatnot growing up have started engendering towards our kids, towards the raising of our kids, that are in essence like toxic and like actually does engender like forms of toxic masculinity, then I think the ad would have been better received at any rate, and
Right.
that's
This
like
is
a discussion that's by the way, I just want to finish off, that's a discussion that's not really being talked about, simply because people are like just focusing on the thumbs down voting and shit like that, and the reaction, and people are just reacting to that reaction, saying that everyone's like, oh, these people are completely unhinged because they can't deal with the fact that their ideas are being called toxic, when the reality is, no, there's some weird shit being shown there that shouldn't have been. So
this is actually kind of a thing about the, around all these Republicans or left and right, et cetera, that I'm seeing. A big thing happening right now is Elliot Page. Ellen Page has become Elliot Page, and it's fascinating to see like the morning that they had become he, the entire Wikipedia page was instantaneously fixed. 1984, I would say. So you've got he first became known in this role, everything along the way. Most beautiful, was it most beautiful? Was it like woman? Where was that? Like they won the most beautiful, like he won most beautiful woman in 2012 or something like that, which is like just showing how XX and XY chromosomes no longer have anything to do with being a female or male. But in the old days, we used to talk about being a man was different. Being a man, and then also being a lady is a kind of thing. A gentleman and a lady are not the same as just your engenderment. And so then that gets into this idea of the toxic masculinity or toxic femininity, I think, is something that arguably needs to be mentioned as well. But in general, like society needs probably to pivot a bit from this. We've had that meme before on the Advanced Philosophy page memes. You guys are probably familiar, by the way. If you haven't checked out Advanced Philosophy memes, you should go there. And also philosopher memes, because we've got, we've grown pretty far. We're at like 65,000 members, so that's not bad one bit. But what we're talking about is the society has shifted its goals for what a good person is, and so transgendering is this very right, in my opinion, and a lot of international political scientists are looking this way as well, in philosophical political science, that transgender is right wing. It's a conservative concept. It's so conservative, so extremely conservative, because, and this is why, that they're willing to change themselves before they're willing to change society's normative values. And if you were to look at gender and say, well, this isn't working because humans don't actually live up to these expectations of capitalism, socialism, societal normatives, that we would just say a woman is not what we've been told, and that someone could have XX chromosomes and still wear pants and still have a beard and still do whatever, and it has nothing to do. But instead, people are saying is, when someone decides to be transgender, is that they're like, well, I'm not doing very well at playing this role, and therefore then that role is more valuable than me, so I have to change to play another role. And so it becomes a kind of a right-wing ideology.
Well, I have a very, very different view on that. Transgenderism to me, in a lot of ways, and from what I've seen in terms of the left-leaning dialogue, as well as from what I've seen for the most part in terms of like just the medical process of becoming transgender, are two entirely very different things. Like one, in terms of like transitioning medically speaking, from male to female on a physical level, that has to do with a lot of psychological hangups specifically, and some biological issues that will happen. Like, for example, it's possible for a male brain to literally develop inside a female body. in that regard. So it's a sort of genetic issue and whatnot.
But
And
what
as a
does that
result,
mean exactly? Can you expand or elaborate on that a bit?
well, what that basically means is that the brain that is meant to develop within the body, there is something that basically happens. I haven't really looked into it too deeply in that regard in terms of the science, but from what I do recall, there's basically some sort of genetic aberration, I guess you could say, that causes this, that makes it so that way the brain that develops first, or rather the brain that develops within the body or the zygote, doesn't exactly match the physical characteristics of the rest of the body. And this is due to a number of factors, such as how many children you've had over time, whether or not whether or not you have a genetic mutation that actually causes this. It's still very new science, but from what I know of, really, this causes incredibly uncomfortable psychological issues, such as body dysphoria, for example, one which people are not comfortable within the body that they have. And in some cases, it can be helped with in case if you're like, you don't have the issue of like your brain being male while your body is female, or the other way around even. In the case of those cases where that's not the case, you have drugs that could possibly help, psychological drugs that could help you become more comfortable in the body that you are. But in the cases in which the female brain is, or the male brain is not in the right body, the best way in which to deal with that is probably to transition physically as whatever gender your brain probably thinks it should be. So that's all purely medical science. And
so wait, let me expand that thought a bit. Okay, so let's say somebody has, so you're open, basically you're saying you're a person who's open to someone changing their body if they're uncomfortable with their biological experience, and there's evidence even to say that people have, like plastics have PBR free, or what's it called? PBA plastics. Like there's kinds of plastics that have a xenoestrogenic molecule that's very similar looking to estrogen. And so there's mutation evidence that this can cause higher estrogen. There's also evidence that you've had a number of kids, or men have had lower testosterone, that also influences the child to be feminine or feminized. But here's my contingency. If someone has, the feeling that they're uncomfortable, what do they call a transableist? Somebody who believes that they should be in a wheelchair and they're willing to cut off their legs to be in a wheelchair. And I know that's a very different issue, but there are a lot of people like that. Surprisingly high numbers of people that are self-damaging in order to be, paraplegic or something like that, or remove a limb because it makes them uncomfortable. What do you think about that in terms of body dysphoria? And is that not related to this idea that someone in puberty, a lot of the time these days, transgenders are in puberty, which is an uncomfortable hormonal time, are saying that they need to change their body rather than just take, as you said, drugs or hormones? Because like if I wanted to take estrogen, dude, I could get the menopause deodorant and I could start rubbing it on my skin and I'd have boobs in a week and I'd still be a guy if I wanted to be, but I'd just be an estrogenized.
Well, just to pivot off that joke or whatnot, we do have tits. They're called man tits. Like we have mammary glands. They're just not activated, and they're not like,
I could activate them. That men could activate. If your wife dies, or if the mother dies, men can start breastfeeding. That's like a thing we can do. We are quite capable of taking that function.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that being set aside here for the moment, my view is that I don't really know, because I've never really heard about that particular issue about people, trying to cut their legs off or something like that just to become like transableists. It seems to me to be like an incredibly psychologically damaging thing that people should get help at and to look at any point in time. But there's science or whatever that suggested, like actual scientific peer-reviewed studies and information that can that basically says that, hey, this isn't really that big of a deal, or it's a perfectly natural thing, or there's scientific reasons for why this actually helps people. And, okay, fine. But I think that those are people who are basically conflating the idea of wanting some extreme form of self-mutilation, self-harm, which is psychologically detrimental, and there is psychological help for that, with them wanting to become an ableist type person, which if you want to become an ableist type person, there's easier ways to do that rather than like cutting off your legs and whatnot. Just like destroy your destroy any nerve damage of your legs. Just destroy it all. And you could do that fairly easily just by injecting certain types of drugs into your legs. So
yeah, but it's the whole idea that your body has to match the experience. It's this right wing, as I put it, idea, this conservative, socially conservative idea to conserve the gender, to conserve the norm of what is able, what is disabled, and to match oneself to that social normative rather than to change the society around the individual. I think another example is amphetamines and educational supplements. They give children that can't handle school because school, in my opinion, the school's the problem. If you have a kid who has to take amphetamines to go to school and sleeping pills to go to sleep at night and antipsychotic, atypical seizure medications because they're getting jitters from the drugs to go to school, maybe we don't want to do that. Maybe we don't want to change the kid. Maybe we want to change society,
Yeah, situations like that are fairly extreme, really. But anyways, with regards to the medical issue, like I said, I differ to this problem of transitioning and trans people as a purely medical issue with regards to the extremes, and therefore the medical experts should probably be listened to in that regard. But in reference to left-leaning stuff, in regards to how it is that these politics sort of play out in lefty spaces, from what I've seen, it doesn't seem to me that the people who are very socially conservative really want to accept or even like respect the identity of people who want to call themselves he, she, they, them, whatever pronouns you want to use for that regards. That they just want to either dead name the person or they want to socially reinforce the idea that they're not that gender. That there was sometimes referred to someone who like hasn't transitioned but who views themselves as trans and whatnot as a means of identity, and so therefore he, she, she, her becomes he, him, and and instead of respecting that, the people who are most conservative in this regard will often just refer to them as she, her, rather than he, him.
Well, that's been a contingency with Dr. Peterson, because he would say, everyone said that Jordan Peterson was against transgendered people, and there was a very, very what they refer to as a pass, a trap, a transgendered person who was quite convincing. Like you can't really tell necessarily that they're trans. Came in and asked how he would refer to her, and he said as a her. So I think also it has to do with the societal norms if someone matches them. As there's other issues where it's like one time I needed to use a bathroom and there wasn't any bathrooms available because the men's room was closed. So I identified as a female. I walked into the women's restroom and I was using it, and some lady walked in and she said, "What are you doing?" I'm like, "I'm identifying as a female." And so, in that circumstance, I was, and I'll admit it, exploiting this loophole that's been designed. I think a lot of people on both sides are jerks. There are great people on both sides, but there are rude people that are beating up peaceable assembling protesters on the left and on the right. The left has got their violent side too, but the right, there are definitely log cabin Republicans. In our advanced philosophy memes group, we have Draken. If you've seen Draken Sayer, she is a transgender Trump supporter, a MAGA person, and interested in QAnon and all these crazy, level things that you wouldn't think would be associated with a trans person. Yet at the same time, I'm totally happy to acknowledge who they are. I look at them as someone who has an XY chromosome, but also as a woman. I don't see why they can't be both. So I don't know. I think, and then maybe I don't fit the standard stereotype for the left or the right, but I'm definitely seeing myself as a conservative in that way, that it's like, well, if you can hang, then there's no problem. But it's like, if all of a sudden you've got a guy with a beard and he says he wants to use the bathroom, and there's women and there's girls in that bathroom, there are people who don't want to do that. They want to have their own feminine space, and they feel like this is a loophole. And I'm using the example of myself because I actually did this. So I don't know. There's the line on defending individual sovereignty, I guess. But
well, with regards to all this stuff, and I think that this was probably played out best in South Park, is that with regards to these ideas and with regards to the things about identification and what you can identify and what you're able to do when you identify as that, we always got to be careful that there are going to be Eric Cartmans in the world. That there are going to be people who will quite literally take advantage of this stuff simply for their own personal gain. And by doing that, they're going to ruin it for everyone. They're probably going to even engender a dialogue without even meaning to, just because they want to take advantage of the social status. They're going to engender a dialogue that is fairly toxic, that makes us talk past each other rather than to each other, you know? And we got to be careful about that. And there are certain people who do engender that regards. I don't know the person which you mentioned, that was a transgender MAGA person, but a person who is a transgender MAGA person that is very grifty would have to be Blair White, for example. Blair White is incredibly toxic. She throws out all kinds of transphobic sentiments and transphobic statements in this regard, while at the same time trying to proclaim Trump, a guy who literally tried to have like bathroom, I mean, not Trump, but the Republican Party under Trump, which he didn't say anything at all about it, which indicates like a complicity through silence, tried to do this whole transgender bathroom ban thing and whatnot. You know, and Trump did himself actually try to get transgenders like kicked out of the military at some point in time. One which like what was his name? I forget what it was, but one of the generals basically told him no. So
there was okay. So that's actually an interesting point right there. So what happened with that, and again with the complicity thing, Trump didn't choose to do this, but he was complicit with this. Yeah. I totally agree with you on this point. That the military had transgender members, and that they were actually rather functional, like as military personnel. In fact, one of them was freaking in charge of finding Osama bin Laden, up until they transgendered right after that. So I mean, like. Judge a person by the consequences of their actions. All right. Like they did their job. Okay. But at the same time, people said, well, let's look at this like the way they do in a doctor's office. And we put things down the line on a checklist, and we have just completely dehumanized the entire circumstance. You have a person who believes that they have an issue where their body and mind need to be in. There's a physical impairment. There's a disorder. Right? It's a disorder because theoretically the body should have been the other gender. So there's a disorder, and you're saying this person needs to have medicine. There are ample rules in the military about personnel not having mental disorders, physical disorders. They have problems with giving pilots who are colorblind the right to fly, So it's like, of all the things that they don't let people do, flat footers, colorblinded, people who are farsighted to be, snipers, like the amount of rules that they put on what a person can do if they are not like perfect. I mean, gosh, like look at to be an astronaut and everything. Like the rules are crazy. And Yuri Gagarin to get 10 minutes in space, right? He didn't drink or smoke in Russia. No vodka. Didn't drink his entire life just so he could get out of the Soviet Union for 10 minutes, right? So there's a number of circumstances where others have been limited based on way less than transgender. But they said, hey, these people think they're another gender, or they probably are, but that means that they have this disorder. They shouldn't be allowed in the military. And Trump did not stop that. I think that's an interesting issue. What do you think about that as their reasoning? And does that make sense, or are they missing a big chunk of the information about what it means to be human and alive?
Well, I'm not really familiar with what it is that you're referencing and whatnot, so I can't really say too much. But what I will say is that with regards to the whole thing in terms of like physical disabilities that you might have, like if you're colorblind and and all that stuff, the reason why that is being allowed in the last 10, 20 years or so is because of the incredible amounts breakthroughs of technology that allow for various different individuals to be able to do things either on the net or various other individuals and whatnot to basically experience certain things. Like, for example, with video games, the video game developers are starting to include over the past 10 years colorblind settings to allow people who previously couldn't play those games because they were colorblind to be able to play those games. It's pretty much a similar aspect in the military. Technology goes a long way to to fixing sort of these physical deficiencies that we as humans might develop as a part of birth circumstances or even life circumstances due to the result of diet, stress, various other diseases that come up. Oh yeah, there's a good one. Yeah, Geordi LaForge is always a good example in that regard. Especially Data's comment on why doesn't everyone have eyes like Geordi LaForge? Would it not be more efficient? And that was in reference to the fact that he was his humanity was being questioned in that regard. As to whether or not he was a living human being. So
that was a great one. I love that Data episode.
Yeah.
Look, we can unplug him. That's not the point. Yeah, I love that one. Sorry. Well, actually, that kind of okay. So I'm trying to hold back getting into Star Wars, but I know you're really into Star Wars, and I find Star Wars to be a deep, philosophically important thing. I look at Star Trek.
Bought by Disney, of course, but go ahead.
Ouch! But yes, I can't argue with that. I mean, it's still deep, just deeply dark and satanic now in certain ways. I wish they hadn't done what they've done to it. But yeah, I mean, page turners, they were not. How dare you? How could they say that about our pages that we love so much? Okay, but Star Trek is the militarization of space, right? It's the NSA. The boldly know what's not been known before. The prime directive in Star Trek is that you cannot be observed while you're observing. It's very NSA and CIA kind of. It's a perfect future. It's a future that has no scarcity, but it's a military future. Everyone who's stoked works for the military. Whereas, well, go ahead. This is important. Go ahead.
Yeah, real quick clarification. The scarcity bit and the bit about scarcity and all that stuff, it's meant to merely apply to humans. Scarcity does exist on other planets for other stuff and whatnot. And it's referred to that humans have a very unique cultural notion on Earth that's not even replicated outside of the fringes in space, like in Deep Space Nine, for example. But go ahead.
Oh, and that's exactly my point. The Ferengi, which, by the way, we have this Tartaria series. So for everyone who hasn't already on the APM thing, make sure you check out Tartary Nova, because we do a lot of things about history. This is if you think about philosophy memes as degree 1 and then advanced philosophy memes as degree 2, then you could say the third degree is definitely Tartary Nova. But so what we found with the Ferengi is that Ferengi comes from the Arabic word for Frank and for foreigner. And so it has a lot to do with the actual Franks in Ethiopia and their trading systems. The rule of acquisition is quite scarcity based, right? It's the idea that not everyone can have everything. So it's totally true what you're saying. But the Star Trek universe, the Earthlings have a federation, and the federation of planets that are interacting with the Vulcans. The Vulcans are like the Jesuits that have come and have kind of been slowly raising and guiding the humans a bit, but humans are still on their own because humans are growing rapidly. We're evolving faster than it's an anomaly according to their system. But it's a military future. It's a navy in space. And so this lack of scarcity is kind of Roman. It's this kind of imperial, you've got this power, it's expanding, it has everything we want, and we can produce, the replicator gives you the food you need because it's really just some particles that we're putting together. It's a very human.
The replicators were only a TNG thing. That wasn't even in the original Star Trek and whatnot,
This is totally true. So looking at scarcity as a thing that's controlled. Seriously, either you're in the military and you have everything you want and there's no price to anything. And all we do is try to learn new things all the time and make the world a better place. And you have to vlog every day and record your journal, captain's log, star date, or you're not in the military and your life isn't as great, and that seems like to be quite the trend in the Star Trek series, is life is not perfect unless you're part of the military in Star Trek.
Well, there are a couple of things I want to correct you on with regards to some of the things you're talking about. Now, now reference to the Federation of Planets and whatnot, this is simply the name that the Earthlings give literally for the alliances that they have gotten around to and whatnot. Not everyone, people who join the Federation could be of various different species, but their own planet have their own internal economy, their own internal rules. They just, to join the Federation, you can't have things like slavery. You can't have have the oppression of your own people. You can't do this things and whatnot, and all that. And with regards to that, yes, the military does look all encompassing in a lot of ways, and does look very very NSA like, very oppressive like. But that's because we're following an exploratory system by and large. It's joined by many other species, but primarily humans, because humans are the one that kind of run it. And also, not to mention, it acts as their primary force of diplomacy, for them to be able to reach out to other species to dispute diplomatic issues and whatnot. And this is usually run by humans, but can be run by other species. The government of Earth is its own separate sort of entity, where the Federation itself sort of acts as its protective military in times of like invasion into the quadrant or whatever, but they're usually joined by other species such as the Klingon and so forth, especially with regards to Borg incursions that happened, as well as the Dominions, the Dominion invading the Alpha and the Beta quadrant. So there was that. So in a lot of ways, we see it as oppressive, but only because we're following the Federation. I believe if we had like a Star Trek series that focused on the day-to-day lives of humans, what their lives were like on Earth versus other places like Federation outposts and whatnot, in some sense or another, that aren't really part of like the greater Federation, they're just outposts there for humans to gather, we would probably get a much, much different view of Star Trek in terms of its ideas. In fact, I don't know if you know this, but the creator of Star Trek, Gene Roddenberry, actually went to Jacques Fresco, the creator of the Venus Project, quite a few times to get consulting and to get ideas on how it is that the people of the future would react to this scenario or that scenario. So
I'm super stoked that you know about that. Do you want to go into a little bit about the Venus Project? Do you know much about the Venus Project?
Yeah, I was actually part of the Zeitgeist movement when it started up and all that stuff. So I know quite a bit about it. I've actually, I think I have like his book as well as his documentary that was sort of created on that regard. And I did a little bit of.
I'm gonna postpone Star Wars. We got to go into the Venus Project. Exciting.
That's fine. That's fine, man. So yeah. So anyways, the Venus Project was essentially sort of made during the era of the various different sort of lowercase t technocrats that were popping up, such as Buckminster Fuller. And the idea, of course, was to create a new society, a new civilization that would encompass people's needs, while at the same time eliminating, on a systemic level, the sort of cultural and social baggage that we have with regards to our ideas of how things should work, and create a sort of new cultural and social element, if you would, through the system of the Venus Project, which would engender things like science, thinking about problems systemically, trying to deal with issues on a technological basis, and even utilizing, trying to build the society up in a way that eliminates the need for money and labor entirely. So, but for the record, before we get into this too long, I gotta say, there was a split between the Venus Project and the Zeitgeist movement that happened a while back ago, and as a result, I went with the Zeitgeist movement and stayed there. But I've always made myself sort of ambivalent towards the Venus Project, in the sense that they're doing good, they're doing their thing, and it's an important thing to do. So I'm not really going to bash them. I'm not really going to like side against them or whatever, like some people in the Zeitgeist movement did. But I just wanted to mention that as a
thing. Can you elaborate on the dispute, because that was a huge thing for me, why I walked away from the Zeitgeist movement. I mean, I was really more interested in esoteric agendas. I don't know if you're familiar with the documentary that was right around this.
I'm familiar.
Yes.
With it.
Yeah. So Ben Stewart he's my buddy. I love him. And Zeitgeist was clearly the other side of the coin, in my opinion. It talks about the same things about how esoteric control and these groups have controlled people. The banking information is fascinating, especially in Zeitgeist 2, talking about how banking is used to exploit people. But the solution all of a sudden being presented was the New World Order through this Bilderbergian Venus project, is what it felt like at the time. And I was very scared of this idea that if we have this societal control of a perfect world, the individual wouldn't be allowed to make as many choices. They'd only be allowed to do the things that they're allowed to do. But so can you, A, explain to me why I'm wrong, and B, can you tell me about where the dispute happened between Zeitgeist and the Venus Project?
Okay. So the first thing to notice here for the record is that the Zeitgeist movement was meant at the very forefront when it was founded to be sort of the intellectual arm or the activist arm. It depends on who you were talking to that would say this, of the Venus Project. It even stated right then and there at the end, join the Venus Project for intellectual and social change. And even says before he gets into the Venus Project segment, he said, but all of these are symptoms, and attacking these symptoms will not help. What do we do to actually help? And therefore he introduces the Venus Project as a means of getting through these issues and whatnot, and they identified specifically that it was monetary systems that seemed to gravitate towards this element of control, this element of corporate control, and this element of control by certain classes, certain elite interests. Members of the ruling class utilize these monetary isms. So the question is, how do we create a system without any monetary ism that doesn't allow for these control-based ideas to come from? And that was what he found was the Venus Project. In fact, when Peter Joseph, he stated while he was putting this stuff together, while he was gathering all this information, he had a sort of epiphany that these were symptoms, but what solution do they go for? And then they found Jacques Fresco along that journey, trying to look for a solution on where did we go from here? And they originally thought there was going to be like, join the Ron Paul movement, join the libertarian movement, join these freedom groups and whatnot, because, but then he decided to drop that segment after he found Jacques Fresco in sort of this, I guess you might call it lightning in a bottle moment. So that was, that was the way in which that sort of went. Now, the dispute itself was entirely interpersonal, I believe. I was in the what was it? Hold on, let me look at the program real quick. I think it's basically. Oh yeah, I was in the Ventrilo server when this was going down at the time, and we had switched over to something else. Some other sort of server, but basically what went on was that there was a sort of internal dispute in the sense of Peter was describing the fact that he was upset with Roxanne Meadows and Jacques Fresco in the sense that they weren't shown more prominently throughout the entire thing, and Jacques Fresco, or at least through Roxanne Meadows, thought of the whole issue as being something that they were having a hard time getting a hold of Peter Joseph, that he wasn't returning their calls, that there were certain things that he wasn't acquiescing to them at all. And Peter Joseph, he responded to that in a very I want to call a hostile manner by saying that he has done everything that he can. He has shown them prominently as he possibly could. The entire segment of his last, segment of his last documentary was like showcasing them very prominently. So and the only reason why he had to dedicate less time to them was to respond to the utter nonsense that kept coming out with regards to their ideas and what it is they were proposing. So that's why their segment was somewhat shortened, because he felt he needed to respond to those criticisms. And I just personally believe it was probably just interpersonal disputes that they couldn't work out as a result of that. And, what actually was going on behind the scenes versus what was shown to us on the Zeitgeist. I guess at the time it was TeamSpeak. Yeah, it was TeamSpeak. At the Zeitgeist TeamSpeak, I'm not entirely too sure. So that's all I can say on it.
Well, that's a pretty good answer, to be honest, for a couple of reasons. One, it's interesting to note Disney World's association with Jacques Fresco and how Disney World and Epcot were trying to do essentially the same thing, but more zeitgeisty. They were interested in the libertarian Ayn Randian approach. They kind of wanted to build it themselves. They wanted to own, Disney privately purchased some land with other people's names, took over half of one county, half of another, created this giant 50 square mile place that he wanted to be the new.
I will say this much: the place that you're referencing eventually became Disneyland. It was basically an effort for them to pitch this idea to people, to like investors that were very much naive and wanting to create a new world, to basically take their money, create this land, create this great stuff, but then eventually turn it over into a Disney themed park land for his various different creations and whatnot. So effectively, Disney was lying when he was saying that, oh, this is going to be the city of the future. So, and that's what Disney does.
He definitely had a dream. I don't think he was able to accomplish his dream, but his dream was certainly to build like a New Berlin with an aerial. His thought was that this would be the way ships would go to a port. This would be where airports. This is the airport city, and so that so much would happen here. American corporations would build here, and that society would start to live here. It wouldn't just be a place you visit, but there would actually, people would visit, but it would be just such a nice city that people would live there. If you start looking into Epcot's original plan, because Disney died a few months after he announced it, which is freaking suspicious. He said, like, we're going to have everything you won't even really own. Like, you'll live in the house. They'll bring you a new toaster that's been developed, and then you'll have a new TV when that's developed, and then it's constantly switched out. And so society would just be perfect because you would live in just the right place for your family, and there would be always gathering places and things.
Real quick, this is related to that because there was a similar project being heralded by Henry Ford, in which he literally wanted to create a sort of cityscape all of his own, if you would, which would be owned by him, and all the products would be created by his company and everything else. Really, this is just simply a new take, or rather a new realization, rather, on an old take, which is the company store, and in a lot of ways, that's basically what these people were trying to do. And these were, in a large sense, I guess you might call them like capital T technocrats. The difference between lowercase t and capital T technocrats is that lowercase t technocrats are international in a sense. They want their idea to spread across the world, and they believe that this is a way for humanity to move forward technologically, socially, and even like conscious-wise. Whereas the capital T technocrats, they were all very much what I would like to call nationalistic, very much into the idea of still having private property, that who would control that private property was the main issue for them. Whereas with lowercase t technocrats, the issue wasn't about who controls that property, who controls that means of production. The idea is that how do we allow other people to control what they want to have and how they want to produce and then how they want it made? How do we give that to the people? So it was very much, it was a similar idea. It was coming from a similar school of thought, but they went off in completely different directions. And that's basically what you're seeing there with the Epcot stuff. So, Disney stuff was actually to create a Disney themed park. And he obviously went on that. And Epcot's idea was more along the lines of what Henry Ford was trying to do with his new take on the company store.
And that's, once you live in the company store and you buy everything from the store, you're an indentured servant anyway. You work so you can live in the city, essentially. Well, let's get into the interpersonal part of that zeitgeist thing, because I think that's fascinating. If there was actually a egotistic dispute, it would be one thing, but it seems more that it was, even if it is, it's like a very minor aspect of the interpersonal dispute, but it makes you wonder, how does that play out for humanity if we can't, choose to build. It went from this idea of having libertarians do what they will, and something great might happen as long as they're free and that the banks don't destroy it, to let's have banks shut down. Let's have Venus Project put up. We'll build this goal. It'll set the world for 1,000 years into a sustainable future. And then that couldn't happen because of interpersonal disputes. So what goes on, how this gets back into our first question about social agenda versus individual sovereignty. How can we mediate this? What do we do to arbitrate between interpersonal disputes so that we can reach this goal? And and is it not, it seems like it arguably should be the only goal. Like, it's like there's arguments about what the goal is, but either the goal is that we all function well with less entropy, or somebody enslaves everyone else and they're all starving to serve that master, right?
Yeah, I do tend to think that we should at the very least try to not necessarily deal with the various different malefactors that would exist in our society, but really try to blunt their overall effectiveness, if you would, in terms of like being able to influence these particular ideas in these particular settings, and how it is that they function. In a lot of ways, the ability to be able to deal with malefactors and individuals that would otherwise disrupt the issue or disrupt the goal for their own personal ideas, for their own personal agendas. Basically, there are cartmans in the world. The idea is, of course, that when you create a system, you should probably take those people into account until they eventually grow old and die, or until, of course, we can eventually reach them. And looks like someone came here. Hold on for a second, real quick. Let me just.
That works for a second.
Probably not a good idea to have it on there, but whatever. Sorry,
no worries.
That package came in there. Had to remove that off the setting there. So, but
No
anyways, as I was saying here, we have to take into account these various different individuals who are willing to disrupt society, and either get them to realize why it is and what they're doing is wrong, to blunt their effectiveness by creating sort of contingencies within the system that we create to remove their ability to be able to influence it heavily. Or I guess the last one, without necessarily trying to do any sort of violence in any particular degree, because I think we would all rather prefer this not come down to violence, is just simply wait for them to grow old and die, while at the same time blunting their influence on, the greater form of society. How we do that without becoming draconian, I'm not entirely too sure. But I would like at the very least to have a sort of social awareness of what propaganda is, specifically how it's utilized, and to create a sort of overall psychology of society that becomes very hostile and very much not accepting of almost anyone who tries to use propaganda or tries to use psychological trickery or tries to use various different logical fallacies in order to be able to push their point to win their argument. Because those people are incredibly destructive, and we already see their destructiveness, especially with regards to like in advertisement, in banking, and the right-wing grifting sphere. Oh god, the right-wing grifters that exist today right now are entirely beholden to the utilization of propaganda, logical fallacies, and getting people wound up specifically for the purposes of trying to utilize them as a as like a social cultural force, which is
pretty Marxist, right? Considering how great they are at propaganda, it's like if you just did the test to, like a diagnostic test, the right wing, like they fit under all of the requirements to be prerequisites to be Soviet propagandists, right?
Well, it's not necessarily the fact that they are Marxist in a sense, because I will say this much for the fact there are very few Marxists out there in the world that would accept these sort of right-wing grifting tactics if it was done on the left in any particular regard. It's really the fact that propaganda and logical fallacies and these various other means of influencing people through dishonest measures is really just a set of tools. And it's a toolbox by and large that should never be used because it always will always lead you down a path of regurgitating shit for partisan means, or because of an inside group to protect that group that you're inside of, or various other cultural factors that sort of placated in. In other words, here's a box of tools. We don't use them because no matter which way we use them, we end up cutting off our fucking hands. And we need to tell people who use those tools to fuck off. And socially engendering that in society would go a long way to stop the right-wing griftosphere, as well as the left-wing griftosphere, if you want to talk about that.
Yes, I didn't want to say it because I want to see how you felt about it. But yeah, doesn't it kind of exist on both sides? Let's be real.
Yeah,
Let's be real.
There is grifting on the left, most definitely. There are individuals that attempt to wield the social status of being lefty simply for the fact that they are lefty, and they will get good accolades and good things or whatever if they say the right things or whatever. But it shouldn't be that. It should be the simple fact that you are a lefty. Here are your values. If you agree with them, you agree with them. If you don't, hey, let's have a talk. Let's discuss why, you know. And in some cases, it is appropriate to be able to ridicule and laugh at people who are your opposites, specifically if they are being stupid, if they are being like very maladjusted and content, or if they're just being cringy, you know, and especially if they are literally doing propaganda. Like whatever the fuck Ben Shapiro opens his mouth, by and large, it's either to speak a truism so he can then lie to you later, or it's simply just to spout off some stupid propagandistic issue, like like that thing with like selling your house, for example, even if it's underwater. So.
Yeah, I mean it's really a thing, and you know I think you put it, you hit the nail on the head also with social populism. You know, like some people say they're not a leftist, they don't support Black Lives Matter, but their Tinder does, because it's like if you want to be successful socially, the idea is to align socially. So it becomes a thing where it's like, what do I believe? Let me check my book. Let me see what they think. I'll go with that, and that's a scary way to be, because if you want to believe in something, it shouldn't be that you're sitting in the left chair or the right chair. It should be, do I believe in equity? Do I believe in equality? Do I believe in outcome? Do I believe in the work? Biblically speaking, the guy at the end of the day who starts an hour before the end of the day versus the guy at the beginning of the morning, they both get paid the same amount by the master. That's pretty socialist and equitable to me. So there's a lot of things where it's juxtaposition to what it should be, like these Christian right. Liberation theology, Christians are supposed to be like all about equity. So that's, just according to their own rule book, right? So, and then vice versa, like you have leftists who are like, well, you're not a leftist, so I'm better than you. And that's a weird way to look at it, because it's really not the idea behind, helping the proletariat, when the bourgeoisie, the new bourgeoisie could be social wokeness, but.
Yeah, and it's kind of interesting that you put it that way, because I personally, the things that I personally believe in, politically speaking, are things like, for example, if you don't believe in workers' rights, then you probably aren't going to be consistent on human rights at all, because workers' rights are literally simply human rights transposed onto the workplace itself. Freedom of assembly immediately transpires onto the ability to be able to strike and to be able to protest your workplace. Freedom of speech and freedom of association are literally freedoms that are to a large degree also enacted upon the workplace, which basically translate into things like being able to collectively bargain with the other workers in your workspace, as well as maybe other workers within the entirety of the company. And the sort of freedom of association translates literally into being able to join a union. So in a lot of ways,
this is my favorite comment of the whole night. This is all I think about, says B1.
Yeah, that is a good thing to think about, honestly, because workers, by and large, are, aside from literally the homeless, are the most oppressed class in the world. no matter what class you are in, whether you're in some sort of racial class such as black, white, Hispanic, or South Asian or whatever, you are going to be likely a worker.
Real discrimination has to do with classism every single time. If it's the guy, like the Poles, they came in here and took our jobs. The blacks, they're slaves. They took all the paid jobs. The Irish, they're taking jobs the blacks wouldn't take. Every single time that there's a racial issue, it's a group of people that are working. It's always the workers. I mean, I hate to sound like a Trotsky. I don't hate to sound like one, but it's just what it is. It's just the truth, isn't it? It's classism.
I would say that classism attaches itself to a lot of other bigotries, and as a result, there's a lot of cross contamination that goes into there. When we're talking about like the grandfather of all bigotries, it would have to be classism. But I do tend to believe that while that is the case, there are a lot of racial issues and a lot of racial prejudices, as well as like political prejudices that would exist in certain countries that specifically would not be gotten rid of if we just got rid of issues regarding classism. However, I will say that getting rid of issues related to classism and tackling a lot of issues related to classism will, as a consequence, get rid of a lot of issues regarding like race or national prejudice and whatnot, So get away from there. Sorry, the other cat is now bothering me, trying to sneak food away from my thing there.
I have a superstition that cats are good luck. So, I mean, I've noticed actually on some other podcasts that when a cat shows up, it's a good deal. Let me get into real quickly because, like, I love Trotsky, but let's also talk a bit about Stalin just because it's historically valuable. And Russia, look, Pew Pew, the Pew Research Center is one of my favorite places. I don't know if you guys do JSTOR for your attorney facts, which we looked at earlier, JSTOR, but also Pew is great for research. They're talking about in Russia the nostalgia for the Soviet Union and positive feelings about Stalin. Now, this is an anomaly to some people. This would be kind of like if there was in Germany today, love for Adolf Hitler or something, but like. This is the love for Stalin. And, if you think about it, it actually makes a bit of sense because and I've had this conversation with people in the Discord on the philosophy memes and advanced philosophy memes. We've talked a number of times about this idea that like, what is the value of Stalin? Well, Stalin took a world that was falling apart and he put it back together. I'm not saying that he was the perfect man, but he did guarantee university education, removed all of the false university elite who were tenured, who were kind of controlling the educational system to Siberia so that he could make it possible for, an entire generation of literate not just, you took peasants and pogroms and kulaks and converted them into astronomers and engineers and everything else. So it'd be a disgrace and it would be a lie not to mention the benefits of a dictator named Stalin and his value the steel man had in terms of manifesting this new world economy that was actually, as much as we're told to believe that the Russians were just drunks, Chernobyl was quite fascinating and quite, impressive. And the idea that the world could have steam power that was just free energy, spinning things all the time, and that was the prototypical future that we're still talking about building with these star forts and with Venus Project and everything else. So, Stalin is the opposite in a lot of ways, in my opinion, of Trotsky, because Trotsky said it doesn't matter if I'm in charge because I'm going to build the system and the system will work without me. It's like Bernie's us, not I, or we, not I, or whatever, the thing. I forget the name of it. But what do you think about Stalin, and what do you think about the idea of an individual as opposed to a group movement that brings forth this equitable change?
Well, first of all, my words on Stalin real quick. Because he abused workers and because he did so much things in a lot of ways to me that were completely unforgivable to workers, as well as like creating the cult of personality and bondaging them to a large degree. And the people that he didn't like would be put in the work gulags where a lot of workers were sent. And their living standard, while it did not increase to the degree under which he and his own cronies and those of his own personal people got lifted up and whatnot. He's a total piece of shit. That being said, however, also I should mention before I get into this is that some of the scientists and some of the people that came up under him that were trained in terms of their abilities and whatnot, some of them were also very much pieces of shit. Like, for example, the head of agriculture that he assigned at the time tried to incorporate Marxian interpretation towards agricultural upbringing, and as a result, he engendered this idea that the theory of evolution was like a bourgeois social structure or whatever that engendered competition and so on and so forth. So, and as a result, a lot of people died, and certain famines happened under him, which he should have stamped down on if he understood evolution and if he understood the nonsense that he was doing so, but he didn't. He was obviously interested in cultivating the cult of personality in order to stay in power, and that's what he did in a lot of time. But again, enough talking shit about Stalin. I'm going to answer the question more directly. In terms of the individual versus the collective and whatnot, I think that this is a bit of a false dichotomy in a lot of ways, because in a sense there has to be a sort of balance between the two, if you would. You cannot have a society without having some sort of collectivized consent to become a society or to operate under that society's rules on a sort of individualistic sense as well, but also on a collectivized sense where each individual comes together collectively to agree on which rules that they're going to have and which rules are important to them and what kind of punishment they should have and so on and so forth. That is oh wow.
Why do you think we wear red, bro? I'm just kidding.
Okay. Yeah, anyways, that being said here, and the individual has to be catered to in terms of what rights that they are capable of expressing, how they are able to express that, whether or not they want to be an artist, or whether or not they want to be a scientist, or whether or not they just want to simply do some sort of labor job or something like that, or whether or not they want to become a theorist or that regard, or hell, maybe they want to become an organizer. But we should allow but the collective should be there to facilitate the individual's needs, while at the same time the individual respects the collective enough not to violate the collective's rights of existing or the rules under which we all came across to agree upon. Now, this gets a bit tricky when you get to people who are born within the system, who to a large degree culturally accepted, but didn't really quote unquote consent to it. But I think that's an issue of culture, really, rather than consenting to something that you're born into, which honestly is a libertarian idea that's kind of self-masturbatory, really.
Yeah, no, I mean, I can totally agree with that, actually. The idea of libertarianism and anarchy, international anarchy, okay, so again, with political science, they would define neoconservatism as Marxist. It's not my original idea. But you look at...
That is fucking weird. Put neoconservatives as Marxists?
Let me explain to you both the reason and the history, and I'll start with the reason, and then I'll go back to the history. Because, actually, I'll start with the history in the sense that I'll say that most of these Trotskyists who were against Stalin started the neoconservatives and were in the Republican movement. They were trying to build the manufacturer republic that had equity. So it's an incredibly interesting thing. The Atlantic, the Guardian, the BBC, you can go look up neoconservative Marxists and you will find out all about us. There are tons. But the issue is that historically, whatever, what's going on now and what's going on since Kissinger is this idea that the Marxists want to build this controlled system that allows for international trade. There's a reason why they went into China, and they thought capitalism eventually will lead to, Marx talked about this, that we'll have a system that manufactures itself. That system will then kill the old system. People will then own and participate in Soviets or in, Das Kapital really represents the Bitcoin and cryptocurrency Soviets, where, you're like, how much is this worth? Well, it's worth that much of this industry. I mean, what's it based on? Labor, right? And trade. So you might say that, a bunch of wind solar token, like the wind power and the solar token, exchange for AGI token, which has to do with, artificial intelligence working, which has to do then with Bitcoin, which is banks using, and Ethereum for humans and stuff. So all of these are different economies, but they're not based on the state. They're based on people. They're based on labor. I mean, this is libertarianism at its finest, and it's a form of Marxism. I mean, it's definitely based on Das Kapital. There's no other explanation. They didn't come up with it themselves. But that's the thing, is that the neoconservative agenda has always been kind of this anti-Stalinite agenda, because Stalin is this dictator and he will die eventually, one way or another. And so do you have thoughts on Trotsky? And do you think Trotsky was good or bad? Or is his system, does he make sense? Is that where we're going with building an industrial bureaucracy?
I tend to think that Trotsky was a complicated individual who, for the most part, had good ideas and bad ideas. But his bad ideas of consistently agitating countries through social and political revolution, no matter where they were, without taking into context the social, political, material dynamics under which that society exists. Because not every society that's like under capitalism needs a sort of a revolution of the proletariat. Not every society really needs that. Some societies do, like, for example, China. China clearly needs a proletariat revolution, a real proletariat revolution, where the workers, they literally rise up against the government, and then they overthrow the government, probably in some cases like behead the government officials, French Revolution style. But in places like, for example, Japan, the capitalism is pretty damn friendly for the most part in terms of family, and it's because they were able to literally take capitalism and reorient it to their social needs and their social cultural system and whatnot. And in a sense, they don't need a revolution. What they need is a change in mindset to have it so that way the workers are considered far more in terms of their psychological and social well-being, as opposed to, oh, I'm socializing within the company, even though I'm socializing with people I don't want to socialize with, and I'm a little bit miserable in that sense, and it sort of makes me a little bit antisocial in that regard. So I think that's what's needed in that regard. Basically just a basic consideration of what the needs of the workers are, and Trotsky didn't really take that into consideration. That's why he's mostly bad in that regard.
That's an interesting perspective, actually. I like that. And I have some issues with Trotsky as well. Obviously, he has some rather racist thoughts that were kind of frustrating if you look at his understanding of Asia and why he thought that China couldn't be functionally socialist or part of the Soviet bloc. That, but every philosopher has issues, so it is what it is. But I'm glad to hear you say that. Do you want to get into? So here's where I think this all kind of bends back into Star Wars. I think we could probably get there now, because okay. Star Trek is like a statist idea, and you think about the alternative, because one is that the technology is run by the Federation. Star Wars lacks the Federation. They have a republic. They have an anarchy in space. This goes back into neo-Marxism. So neoconservative Marxism, the belief is that there is no UN control over everything yet, and therefore every state is the oligarch that has risen up. Every state is the mafia of Las Vegas, of their own. They have their own paid police for their own state, but they're not in control of another state necessarily. The states don't have a overall. So each state is in anarchy with each other. They can interact. We might have treaties. We could break treaties. So it's this kind of idea that a new world order is essential to the Star Trekian Federation system. Star Wars lacks that, and the Empire is the evil thing. The idea of Star Trek is evil in Star Wars. If you have this military state, you can see the Death Star. So putting grass on the Death Star is not George Lucas's agenda, because he grew up during Vietnam. The chaos of Star Wars, that basically, I think theoretically, according to the books, that the technology for the hyperdrive was dropped off by a dying race, left to these randoms, that they were like, hey, you guys exist. That's enough of a qualification. We're going to die. So here, take our hyperdrive technology, do what thou wilt, not do what's right or wrong, do what thou wilt. And so all of a sudden you've got hyperdrive and people are pirating, space pirates, you've got space military, you have anarchy in space. So it seems like that's the difference. You have the top down versus bottom up. What do you, correct me?
Well, in regards to the lore specifically of how they got the hyperspace, the hyperdrive, it was actually it goes back to the Rakatan Empire as well as the Celestials. The Celestials were going around raising up other species and whatnot that they had like seeded on worlds, as well as other sort of species under the Celestials, like the Gree and the Brune. And essentially what had happened was is that they were trying to make it so that way this galaxy would be habitable and interconnected to a certain degree. So once the development of the technological and social development of these various different species got raised up to a certain point, what would happen then is that they would introduce themselves to determine whether or not this species was capable of being able to wield this technology. And once they determined that they gave them technology and they let them do with it whatever it is they wanted, so long as it didn't cause major social issues with all the other planets also getting their stuff and whatnot. And but then there comes the Rakatans. The Rakatans were basically oopsie, we made a mistake. We gave species the wrong species the technology, and now they're literally coming after us. It's Rakatta for the record, if you're looking it up. So
I'm having a problem with DuckDuckGo all of a sudden. They're just trying to screw me. All right, go ahead. But yeah, they're great in Star Wars Knights of the Old Republic. I love the game Knights of the Old Republic because the Rakatan, they have they're like these fish-looking guys that are super big-headed, and they have their islands, and they have the Star Forge, and they're using a star to power their technology. But yeah, go ahead.
Well, it's a little bit more complicated than that, but anyways, getting back to the lore history. Anyways, once they had this technology, they not only drove away the brain away, but they also drove a lot of other species away into the point in which they became literally the dominant power. And because that they were a species that was fueled and connected to the dark side, they engaged in things like slavery, genocide, total war tactics, even engaged in torture for their own pleasure of the species that they particularly had a fetish for torturing. So, and as time went by, they became such a menacing force that Tatooine, the planet that they were on, initially to conquer, they were driven away by the natives, and then Tatooine, and then the Rakatans literally glassed Tatooine in response. And many thousands of years later, eventually the inhabitants that went underground to escape this event came up, and we have the Jawas and the Tusken Raiders as a result.
The Sand People, and that's another fascinating aspect of. I mean, Star Wars, by the way, for anyone who doesn't know this, is not really science fiction. It's really just historical fact that has a space allegory. Nearly everything in Star Wars is based on actual historical events that happened either in Africa or in the Caribbean or around the world. And you can see some of the movies that Alec Guinness was in the 60s have a lot to do with Star Wars, where they go into a place and they see in this very xenophobic way that others look so freaking different that they're basically aliens, and this is where undocumented workers versus illegal aliens, and it has a psychological, philosophical gestalt perspective. But the Rakatan are very interesting because if you think about Tatooine is this place where it's very dusty and dirty. Africa, the Sahara, used to be green, used to have tons of water, used to have, civilization. People were traveling back and forth. The 3 Great Lakes in the United States are a third of the size of the giant mega Chad lakes of Africa that are buried by the Sahara. And we have a people there, which are called the Bushmen. The Bushmen are otherwise known as the Sands people. And so the Sand people are essentially kind of a idea that there's the Sands people have been forced into this like the Neanderthal after the Campiferi volcanic eruption have been forced into a survival mode. And so they've lost a lot of their liberty and privilege of having lived in this wonderful place because they live in a sandy place. Also, the Dune books are very important to the origin of Tatooine, but yeah.
So anyways, picking it back up, what happened, so basically you can see that this is happening all across the galaxy. They either enslave a planet, or if they get off there, they just simply glass it. Now, this happening for so many thousands of years, eventually there is a disease that gets introduced into the Rakatan people that cuts them off from the Force. We don't know anything about how this happens. We don't know why it happens. Some lore theorists have believed that maybe because there were certain celestials that were still around, that they introduced this into there before they decided to go ahead and go away themselves. And once they started getting cut off from the Force, their technology, because it was reliant on them using the dark side of the Force to influence their technology, they stopped having access to that technology. And as a result, the other species that they had subjugated and enslaved started finding out about this, and they all rose up. And the rise up was so tremendous that they literally overthrew the entire bit and the entire Rakatan Empire. And in its place, they formed a sort of republic. And the point of forming the republic initially was to not only completely reject slavery in every aspect of its very being, but to also create an alliance strong enough to fight the Rakatan people, to fight the Infinite Empire if it were to ever return. So that's literally the origin of the Old Republic. It's founded upon a rejection of slavery and a rejection of the dark side of the Force. So, and
that's a good look at it. Also, you have to think maybe the fact that they were destroying so many Force species. The midichlorians are exploiting like organisms in order to exist, essentially. So that the Force is a reciprocal symbiotic relationship with midichlorians. That they're destroying future. Like who's to say how the midichlorians work? They could easily be trans-dimensional in terms of space-time.
I've always thought of the midichlorians as being simply just a measure of people's force potential in the same way.
You don't think that they're alive?
Well, I think that they're alive, but I think the way in which they work, by and large, with regards to force, is that it's simply just a sort of measurement of force potential. In the same way that IQ is a measure of intellectual potential. Like someone can have a really high IQ in the IQ test, and it could fluctuate up and down throughout their entire life. But because they've never actually had the chance to be able to exercise that intelligence in any particular way, they don't come off as very intelligent to begin with.
It definitely makes sense. My perspective has always been, that the midichlorians are sort of a para-living consciousness of some kind. There's a certain amount of consciousness to them, and so by the Rakatan destroying the places for them to proliferate, but just by glassing planets with the Starforges, that they lost the Force in themselves. They drained so much Force from the universe that the midichlorians were like, no, you can't do this anymore, because we literally use life to survive. Without life, we can't live. We don't just live in rock. We live in biology. That seems, that was what I looked at it as. But, I mean, who's to say? That's,
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it really depends. I mean, if George Lucas was actually going to do his trilogy, from what we know of the notes that he had been given out, is that he was going to explore and explain to us more about what the midichlorians were supposed to be, how they're meant to interact with the Star Wars universe, and how it is that they influence various different events and whatnot. But of course we never got that. but given the way in which things are sort of panning out now with the Mandalorian, as well as the fact that Kathleen Kennedy is kind of kept at arm's length from that project, and like other projects that are slated to come up, like the new, like I don't know, there has been talk about giving the character Cara Dune her own television series, which would probably also be headed by Dave Filoni, away from Kathleen Kennedy.
I was about to say, Dave Filoni's my hero. Oh my God, we need Dave Filoni to do everything, and that man is so cool.
Well, I wouldn't say everything. Like there's a couple of things he falls short on, but he's definitely better than what we've been having lately. So I'll take anything at this point.
Yeah, he's kind of the messiah of Star Wars in this weird way. Like, I don't know. I mean, I definitely agree that there are some things that he's short-sighted about, but like his understanding of Plo Koon and how he's actually developed Anakin Skywalker into a Chad was so nice, because we needed that 90210 Matt Lanter version of Anakin Skywalker. But yeah, cool. Agreed.
Yeah. But anyways, moving a little bit into the future, if you don't mind me going up to, there's an interesting thing because Star Wars has to a large degree sort of revolved around this whole conflict between the Jedi and the Sith in a lot of ways, and the interesting history behind that, by the way, is very, very fascinating, because this was during the release of Star Wars: The Old Republic MMO, in which they revealed some interesting pieces of history that I don't know if they were really touched upon before they got into this or not. But if it was, I'd have to look it up. But as I said before, the reason why the Sith and the Empire get down, cat again.
The goddess of Egypt, Bastet, and how she loves to use cats to get on our laps.
Yeah. Anyways, the entire reason for the conflict being so omnipresent within the Star Wars universe is because basically 5,000 years before the rise of the Empire, there was a conflict that was started by the Sith into Republic space, one which they invaded Republic space because of various different Machiavellian shit going on with their leaders, one which a certain member of their leaders, I think it was I forget the name of the exact Sith, but he manipulated events.
Bane, Revan.
Damn.
Before Bane and Revan?
No,
Is it before them?
It was before them, way before them. I'm talking about the Great Hyperspace War. Hold on. Great Hyperspace War.
So while he searches that, and again, like Star Wars is so weird. One of the reasons I got really interested in the lore of Star Wars, and by the way, if you know what the word for birdology is, it's bird lore. Lore is the British word for study of these things like logos, and the tales. But Wikipedia.
There we go.
Oh, go ahead. But Wikipedia, I would say really quickly, Wikipedia is incredible, because if you start to look into like how detailed the history has been in Star Wars. And, and considering how history is a lie anyway, it's like, it's not a big deal. You might as well read the Wikipedia. It's great.
Oh, yeah. With regards to that, Wikipedia is great. Just look up the Legends tab for the Chiss species, and you will literally find that there is an in-universe study for something regarding the Chiss from an in-universe university. It's like, wow, that is some crazy detail. But anyways, the name of the Sith Lord was Naga Sadow. So Naga Sadow manipulated events against Mark Aragnos to basically try to gain power for himself and to marshal Sith society into a war with the Republic, while at the same time trying to say to Mark Aragnos, no, we should not use Gary and Jory Daragon as pawns or as means to go to war with the Sith or to destroy their very existence, what you're suggesting here. We should use them as an opportunity to gain more riches, in the sense and whatnot, from the Republic, because they know about the Republic from the fact that the Dark Lords of the Sith, or rather the Dark Jedi that were exiled to their planet, directly to their planet, I might add, big oopsie on the Jedi part, but basically they know about that from them. From people like Ajun Tapar and so forth. But So basically he was trying to say, oh no, we should use this for either as a means of gaining more ground and expanding our empire, while at the same time trying to make diplomatic entreaties to the Republic, while at the same time he was still manipulating events to get them to go to war with the Republic. So yeah, but basically they lost this bit of a conflict due to inner machinations and, well, Mark Aragnus' own apprentice literally turning against him, which, by the way, was also one of the people that he was using to go to war with the Republic. I think it was Gary Daragon that it was using. Basically, it was the brother, not the sister. Oh, sorry, did you want to say something?
Well, I had a minor question, I guess. So looking at, I mean, maybe I'm supposed. Do you want to? I'll wait. I just kind of want to ask you about good and evil and Sith and Jedi. But if you want to continue
wait for a little bit. Anyways, so after that, after they lost the war, apparently we find out that the Republic held a conference or held a meeting, the entire Senate did, on whether or not what they should do with the Sith Empire. The Sith Empire was clearly beaten back, and they had no military to be able to defend themselves. But the decision that they made was to literally genocide the Sith people, to wipe out every remnant of their existence, because they were dark side users, and the Jedi went along with this. So basically, what happened was that one of the individuals that was meant to be emperor but didn't vie for the power, at that time, made his move, gathered the people, the remnants of his people, and flung themselves out into wild space. And in wild space, he gathered his armies, he gathered his forces, he collectivized everything that he could, and then he finally promised his people revenge against the Republic. And ever since then, there has been a constant and consistent war between the Jedi and the Sith. So it was literally a decision to genocide the people that had clearly been broken. And if they had bothered to do any research or any kind of investigation of their own, they would find out that, hey, they were manipulated by their own leaders. We should try to help these people. We should try to give them compensation, but they didn't, because they were dark side users. And obviously the Jedi sort of joined into this. They didn't object to it at all. So, and it was like the greatest mistake that they had ever made, because 1,300 years later, they made their incursion into the galaxy again, and it was a bloodbath of sorts. So, yeah.
So that's okay. So first, I got to make a joke, because in terms of testing Star Wars' Wikipedia, where is that? I have it somewhere. It's oh man, there it is. Okay. So I went and I posted this thing in Wikipedia to see if I could get it to work, where I was like, Manny Bothan. I created a character. I was like, Manny Bothan, he's great. Manny Bothan died for the data that saved the, because many Bothans died is the actual line. Like, yeah, it's Manny Bothan, and Manny Bothan was a really good guy. And, at the wall of the Death Star, Darth Vader, he just misses Manny Bothan so much. Well, they weren't going for it, because there's no evidence. There actually is a character named Manny Bothan in the 80s. Nothing's canonical anymore. Whatever. Okay. So there's that. The other thing I was going to say is, looking at Dune, let me find the example why I want to bring this up. So if you know that Dune is this book series that was fascinating, and it talks about spice. It talks about this desert planet with giant worms, like essentially the worms from Star Wars. And it also talks about the Jedi, sort of. It refers to the Bene Gesserit. And the Bene Gesserit, or, it's like the Jesuits. So you have this amazing book series about this desert planet where they're selling spice. And spice has to do with the Kessel Run. Also, you can look into the Scythians really quickly. Let's set that in. So the Sith have to do with the Scythians, which are the Slavic Empire, versus the Tartarian Empire, the Scyths, right? So there's a bunch of fascinating history that goes into what George Lucas took from Dune. He actually got a lot himself from his own history classes and what he studied in terms of the Tartars and the Sith. But beyond the feminized Jesuit, the Bene Gesserits, who are kind of like this nun class, Dune talks about this war going on with this kingdom, and that there's a number of lineages of princes, but it all comes back around spice. And so spice is this drug in space. It's also a medicine in space. Dune uses it to turn their eyes blue. Like, you know how we get red eyes from drugs is the thing in America or in Earth. Their eyes turn blue when they take spice. And you look into this idea of the Kessel Run, and this is also where, Darth Vader, let's do this real quick. Darth Vader, Hebrew, Darth Vader, before they changed the chest plates, his chest plates here actually have Hebrew writing on them, right? The original Star Wars, if you ever watch I have it on Laserdisc. I have the original version. If you actually, there's a 17, what's it called? The project where they recently restored the original version, the 1974, I forget the name of the project that's restore Star Wars. Before they created the Star Wars language, originally it was written in Hebrew. And this is fascinating mainly because looking at a Hebrew rabbi, Darth jewel chest plate. I'm trying to find, instantaneously this thing. But the chest plates that the Jewish rabbis wear is really, really uncanny to the chest plate of Darth Vader, and it's for a reason, right? It has a lot to do with this, the Bene Gesserit religious order and how he's going back to this prototypical Tartarian, because the Ashkenazis come from Khazar. Khazaria is Tartar, is where Georgia is today, and so they still continue to keep that kind of lineage in Star Wars, which is fascinating, looking at the Scythian origin of the Sith. And the Jesuit, if you look in liberation theology, the Christian concept of liberation theology essentially is you take the parents away from the children. You take the children away from the parents. And the parents, they're not able to screw up the children. So instead, the priests, and the Jedi, they're raising these kids. And so you've got this society that is taking children and parents away from each other. They're raising them to do exactly what they're told. They're manipulating democracy, and the Jedi are messing with the entire order, the fabric of society. And they're magical, like they're Ubermensch, okay? Like in the most literal sense, they're beyond men. They're Ubermensch, and they won't let them love. So also love is an important human quality. They're saying you're not allowed to have attachment. You're supposed, arguably Anakin Skywalker says he's supposed to love everyone. How'd that work out for Anakin? He still ended up in love. So there's a certain amount of psychological Stockholm syndroming going on with the Jedi, and the Padawan are being raised to, love nothing but everyone at once. Then you got the Sith, and the Sith are following kind of this alternative perspective that you're supposed to, make love specific. You don't want to just treat everyone the same, because you actually want to show love to certain people. And passion. We could get into, there is no passion. There's only the Force. We could talk about the.
I would like to point out real quick that the Sith themselves actually don't indulge in the idea of love, because love is a weakness that will literally, in a lot of ways, lead to betrayal. In fact, Uthara Bane, the character in KOTOR, which sort of introduces you to the idea of the Sith philosophy as it was first expounded upon there, basically states that while love isn't exactly forbidden for the Sith, it's not something that's culturally accepted among them, because it creates too much of an opening for your enemies to be able to use against you, and therefore it acts as sort of a weakness. They view it as a literal weakness in their society. And in fact, this is even expounded upon when you get into when you interact with certain characters on the Sith side, in which you see that people are, there's a wife that you interact with of a particular Dark Lord, and then you find out that she was just using her marriage and her means of quote unquote love to elevate her status and to get more status for her son, who was born as a result of the union. So Sith don't exactly culturally engage in love as we think about it. So
that's an interesting and important point. Passion is not love. The Jedi, remove attachment, but it seems like both groups are moving away from love. So just can you expand? Is this a good moment to ask you, like, do you think the Jedi are ultimately good, and do you think that the Sith are ultimately evil? Are they both right and wrong? Where are we at with that?
I do believe that there are circumstances in which the Jedi can be in the wrong, and clearly I've touched upon that with regards to their stupid decision of like trying to genocide the Sith people, which literally causes their multi-millennial long conflicts and whatnot. And then there are stupid decisions with regards to the Sith that they have made, and so on and so forth. But their philosophy does have a certain amount of sense. It does make sense within that regard. I don't believe either side is truly good or evil. However, if you would ask me which side has more of a benefit towards the overall state of the galaxy, I would say the Jedi, because during the time, what was it, when Darth Bane was coming up to power and whatnot, the Jedi were like rising them up, trying to get them to trying to get them to become extinct, but they didn't realize that Darth Bane was also killing everyone, trying to consolidate his power. After a while, after that had happened, there wasn't really a republic at that time, because the republic had been squashed by the Sith, and the galaxy was ruled by the Sith for so long, in which the Jedi were kind of on the back foot. So the Jedi took it upon themselves to become sort of feudal-esque lords, I guess you could say, of various different planets of the galaxy, while they rebuild the Republic after it was kind of mostly gone, and to sort of restore the Senate, restore the natural order. And when they were like ready to give up that power, they gave up that power without any problem. And not only that, they allowed the Republic to literally relegate them to certain tasks that they would utilize them for. And they would never, and throughout the entire history, they would never actually overstep their boundaries in that regard, and it was to their detriment, of course, because that's sort of the lead up of the context of what we have with the original, with the prequel trilogy, So basically, I think that the Sith overall are a force for negligence and malcontent in the galaxy. Well, the Jedi are ultimately, not exactly perfect or not exactly good. They definitely offer a better state for the galaxy than the Sith.
I mean, to be fair, they only do this to their own. So they only take certain kids and make them. They only Stockholm certain kids. They don't. Yeah. Not everyone lives with their parents. It's kind of a Federation thing. Well, I want to expand on the Kabbalah aspect of Star Wars, because we're talking about the Jewish plate of Darth Vader and Han Solomon. As I kind of hinted that I wanted to bring this up to you earlier. Han Solomon, you've got Han Solo is a man. He's Han Solomon. And he says to Greedo, he says to Obi-Wan Kenobi, but he tells everyone, really, it's his favorite thing to say, is that he could complete the Kessel run in less than 12 parsecs. And this is a huge, huge deal in Star Wars, because parsecs is a measurement of distance. How do you do something in less than a certain amount of distance? There's an answer, by the way. But also, what is Kessel? Kessel has to do with this planet where there's sea material that's producing spice, and then the spice is back from Dune. So they didn't even change the word. Of all the things in Star Wars that they didn't change from Dune, spice is the most important. The spice trading and the health medicine of spice and the drugs of spice, and it's all spice. Okay, so how does he get spice in less than 12 parsecs? What's a number less than 12? Give me the number just below 12. 11.
I'm not aware of it, honestly. I don't study Kabbalah all that well.
So the number less than 12 is 11, right? So let's look at this. There's 3, 6, 9, 10, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. Okay, so the Sephirot is a great Kabbalistic tree of life concept. It's this idea that there is this, there's the Tiferet, there's the Doth, there's the Metatron, and there's these, there's this personified idea of angels, but really they have to do with consciousness. They have to do with not human form, the moon, the sun, all this mercurial energy. Well, the Kessel run has to do again with this distance. So his story is that he uses his warp drive to get through a space to a point in less distance than normal. The way this works is that in space there are asteroids, according to this, this science fiction story. There's asteroid fields and things. You have to veer around the asteroid fields, which creates more distance. And so the better your computer, the less changes and angles and pivots in your course. And so the shorter is straight line. The more straight of a line of travel, the shorter the distances. And so Han Solomon's able to commit. Yeah. Sorry.
Oh, so sorry, my cat. Sorry, this cat is like trying to get on top of me.
See, cat. This is how you know. This is how you know the cats. They're cats. They're like, because cats are from space, clearly, and they're just spying on us, and they want to make sure that we don't find out too much. But okay, so you have this idea that there's less than 12 parsecs. Han Solomon's able to commit the distance in a shorter, straighter line, and he's able to commit this in less than 12, and he's able to do this in 11. There's a lot of interesting things about that. We can get into that later or in another time. But I think that that's an interesting aspect of the answer, really, for even the most normal of Star Wars fans, would be just that it's not. It's a lot of people say, "Oh, it's impossible." No, it makes perfect sense. Han Solomon's able to do this because he's committing a shorter distance to straighter line to a point. Yeah.
There's also a bit of a technical element to this as well, with regards to how the spaceships work and how they calculate parsecs. So basically, when a ship goes into hyperspace and whatnot, their contingency of being able to maintain a certain amount of parsecs via distance is based on the fuel that they have available to them. And they can calculate how many parsecs that they can go before the fuel line runs out, and that they are forced out of hyperspace in that regard. Because the fuel that that Star Wars has isn't meant to fuel the thrusters, because that's like perpetual in a sense. That they don't really need fuel to fuel the thrusters. What they need fuel for is to be able to maintain their stay in hyperspace. So, and being able to do that in less than 12 parsecs was considered to be very much impossible in the sense, because it takes like at least 16 or 17 parsecs to be able to actually get through the Kessel Run.
Right.
In order to be able to do that.
Which is, again, 17 with 0 and 7. So 17 has a value because of 0 of 18. 18 is 3 6s, and it has to do with the holy number. It's like Catch 22 was originally going to be named Catch 18. It's like the holiest number to the Kabbalah.
Yeah, I suppose so. I'm not really well read up on that stuff, so I couldn't really say. Most of my studies in religion had to do with rather the history of the developments of the religion and how it is that they changed over time, as well as what elements that they took from other people, from other religions, in order to get the acceptance of that religion from other cultures that they were trying to spread that religion to at any point in time, So.
Absolutely. Well, this is actually, I think of all the things that we've covered tonight, this has been a really fascinating talk. I think this has been, you're a really wise and stable genius, as Trump says. I appreciate you taking the time to do this. I'm going to look through the list of questions from people to see if we can answer any of them. Yeji's, let me go back. I saw he had something about vaccinations. I know that was at the earlier part, but where was that? That was interesting to me. Okay, what about the vax? Will you take it? It was really, let me expand on that question. So right now the vaccination concept has a lot to do with Trump, because Operation Warp Drive, I think, is the name of Trump's vaccination campaign. Let's get back to the synchronicity there. Is this idea that there's a number of people that hate vaccines that are willing to take this just because of Trump. There's a number of people that are very pro-science that are unwilling to take this just because of Trump. So I think with that perspective in mind, and how would you answer this question? What do you think about the vaccine in that terminology, like in the frame of reference of like it's created by a guy that a lot of people don't trust, or it's not created by he's like you said, consented. He's like a big part of warp drive, forcing this to happen fast, and will you take it under, like, would you just rush out and get it the first day? Are you going to wait? Are you going to not take it? Are you going to try to like stay inside instead? Where are you at on that? And what do you think about other people? What choices should they make, or should they have a choice, I guess, on that?
In my mind, with regards to Trump and his whole warp drive bit, I tend to think of it more or less the lines of Trump is trying to take credit for something that he didn't really do. I mean, all he's really doing with warp drive is to literally facilitate the distribution of this vaccine and whatnot to the public as fast as he possibly can, and that's what Operation Warp Drive, from my understanding, is meant to be. Trump propped it up or pumped it up as something that's not that really it really isn't. But when it comes down to it, there's that. Now, from my understanding, with regards to will I take the vaccine, it really depends on which vaccine is more effective, which vaccine has a lot more behind it in terms of its reputability, and whether or not it's actually shown to be safe from these areas. I mean, the Pfizer vaccine is coming from Germany. The Moderna vaccine, I can't remember exactly where it's coming from, but interestingly enough, there was recently released a bit of some development on that front, and they found out that that was actually doing a lot better in terms of the testing and in terms of the efficacy of it than they had actually expected. So they expected much lower results, and what they got was actually higher in terms of its efficacy than they had thought process. Now they're obviously going, because of these results, they're pushing for verification to get this out there. But I think that's a bit of a mistake on the people who are developing the Moderna vaccine, because this involves RNA manipulation as well as a few other things and whatnot that attaches itself to your bloodstream in order to be able to get rid of the virus and all that. So I think there should be more testing before any kind of effort to fast track this thing out, just because of the overwhelming results that they've gotten now are fairly positive that they didn't even expect. The Moderna vaccine, on the other hand, the one that's going through Germany, that's more of a traditional vaccine. And from what I know of, and from what I'm aware of with regards to Germany's own regulatory body with regards to how they release drugs like this, I think that's probably going to be the safer one. Will I take it? It depends on which one is out there first and how what the efficacy of it is. But yeah, sure, I'd take it. As far as like people who are not wanting to take the vaccine because of Trump, but they're very scientifically minded, people who are going to take the vaccine but hate vaccines, but because it's Trump, they're going to. These people, to me, they're just partisan hacks. They don't actually have a bit on science. They have a bit on the party. And because that party hates this guy, they're going to go with the fact that they're not going to take the vaccine because they hate this guy. The other people who are going to take the vaccines but hate vaccines in general or paranoid about vaccines or whatever, they are doing it for Trump. It's the exact same thing. They're just partisan hacks. So they weren't paranoid about vaccines. They're for Trump, so they're going to go with whatever Trump does. These people who don't like the vaccine or whatever, it's not about the vaccine, it's hatred of Trump, so they're going to hate on Trump or whatever. But it's like, this is the wrong thing to hate Trump over. If you want to hate Trump over on anything, it's that you should emphasize the fact that these people you should emphasize the fact that Trump is trying to take credit for something that he's like not really doing. Like, what he's doing is he's throwing $5 million to Moderna. To the Pfizer company. To the company to Pfizer, in order to get the vaccine out quicker, which is a laudable goal. But like the coronavirus vaccine is so demanded by the entire world that I find it hard to believe that just that 5 million from the U.S. actually helped anything. So that's my answer.
Right. That's a good answer, to be honest. I'll probably need a gun put to the back of or the front of my head to take it, but that's just me, you know. But hey, like I think it's important that the opinion that you just made, like I think that I wish that other people like worked that way in their mind, that they were making decisions based on logic and on facts and on other things than on personal endorsements from their enigmatic Führer or leader, or you know, if they hate him or love him, it shouldn't really have to do with the truth. So looking for the truth should always be the highest goal, beyond whether or not the wrong person loves or hates it. Yeah. So I respect your answer. I think that's a good one. I think Brian Christopher says, I'll take the vaccine if everyone else takes the red pill.
Well, my response to that is simply, there is no pill. You're all taking placebos and you're all reacting based on what everyone else tells you that the color of the pill is. That's just it. Or you've already taken a side beforehand and you're just deluding yourself into thinking you've taken a colored pill. You know, it's one or the other.
Yeah, I mean, you know, again, like it's funny where I think a lot of the people that follow me might disagree with me on you and I are agreeing more right now than my normal demographic. I think that it should be based on data. I've designed adenovirals. I don't think they're completely unsafe. If you look at bacteriophages and how we can use them to manipulate DNA to extend adenal telomeres and have I want to have blue hair someday, just naturally, right? Like organic blue hair. Yeah. I want to, you know, and like I'm from Santa Cruz, where they have all the slug ladies. You know where the Twi'leks are really from? They're all banana slug girls. We know what's really happening. Well, what's your cat's name, by the way?
Kitty. He's unfortunately immunodeficient, but you know, he's a veteran of the streets. He's kind of a badass, a bit of a terror to other cats on the street. So, but as a result, he's really muscly, but he's a little bit heavier than he looks. So.
That's an adorable cat. I like that cat a lot. All right. Well, guys, everyone, thanks so much for watching. Devan, this has been fascinating. This has been a lot of fun. I really appreciate that you took the time to do this. I'm sorry it took a while to get this set up, but I appreciate that you came on.
All right. Great to have me on, man. I appreciate it. And yeah, this was a great time, by and large. A lot better than I thought it would go. So.
Yeah, I like to scare people right before they get on it. So that's the other thing. You were not afraid. You're like, yeah, I'll do it. I was like, sweet. That's awesome. So, and remember, guys, like, you know, just because you don't always agree with someone doesn't mean you can't have a real discourse. And I feel like I learned a lot and I found out a lot. And like, I agree with you on a lot of things. I think people didn't expect. I don't know if you expected, but there's a lot of levels that we met. So I appreciate that. And I hope that we can continue to have this kind of discourse. I hope people continue to like follow your page, guys. Check out Voice of Reason 467. Go to the Philosopher Memes group. Go to the Tartary Nova. Let me put that back on the screen. Go to the Tartary Nova page. Check our news. Go to the Philosopher Memes group and post in here and find out what's happening. And check out Advanced Philosophy Memes as well. And yeah, if you guys haven't already, you know the Discord is pretty fascinating. So get in the Tartary Nova Discord. But okay, guys, thanks a lot. And thank you a lot, Devan. We'll see you soon.
All right. See you, man.